Lin Feng was a little surprised. Supremacy Heavenly Might had actually surrendered so quickly. Moreover, he looked very sincere. It was definitely not a fake surrender. There was no point in doing that. In Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain, nothing could be concealed from Lin Feng. Hence, even though Lin Feng did not deliberately listen to Supremacy Vicissitude's persuasion, in reality, the conversation between Supremacy Vicissitude and Supremacy Heavenly Might could not be concealed from Lin Feng. In Lin Feng's opinion, all of Supremacy Vicissitude's words were just empty words. They were all empty promises, describing the beautiful future for Supremacy Heavenly Might. Lin Feng was just a controller who had transformed into a universe. He might have a 1 in 10,000 chance of becoming a kiliocosm sovereign in the future, but that was all. Lin Feng had not even made any promises to Supremacy Heavenly Might, and neither had Supremacy Vicissitude. Even Lin Feng himself was not confident if he could become a kiliocosm sovereign. In fact, he could not even see the direction and hope of becoming a kiliocosm sovereign now. However, it just so happened that such a seemingly hopeless bet had convinced Supremacy Heavenly Might. Moreover, he accepted it and wholeheartedly surrendered. Dark Domain Supremacy, you're not a traditional controller who has lost hope like us. You don't know how much we yearn to obtain a glimmer of hope. No matter how slim this hope is, as long as there's the slightest chance, we'll seize it. Transformation into a universe means being the potential candidate of a future kiliocosm sovereign. For this 1 in a billion chance, most controllers will choose to take the gamble without hesitation. As if sensing the doubts in Lin Feng's heart, Supremacy Vicissitude explained to Lin Feng through voice transmission. Lin Feng also nodded thoughtfully. He had still underestimated the impact of transformation into a universe. Or rather, he had underestimated the desire of those traditional controllers in the medium kiliocosm to become a kiliocosm sovereign. Even if it's just a pseudo-kiliocosm sovereign. Not only was the significance of him being a controller who transformed into a universe not light, it was very, very heavy. It was so heavy that even Lin Feng did not realize how important he was. However, Supremacy Heavenly Might had finally surrendered. Lin Feng could implement the next part of the plan without worries. Of course, the prerequisite was that he must handle all the controller supremacies who had descended from the medium kiliocosm. Supremacy Heavenly Might. How many people in your Skyhorn Alliance have descended from the medium kiliocosm? Lin Feng asked directly. Supremacy Heavenly Might also knew about Lin Feng's plan, so he replied without hesitation, Dark Domain Supremacy, if you want to cut off His Majesty the Kiliocosm Sovereign's detection, you have to deal with all the controllers. Currently, in the Skyhorn Alliance, including myself, there are 3 2-star supremacies who are the 3 alliance leaders. All of us descended from the medium kiliocosm. As for 1-star supremacies, they were all recruited by the 3 2-star supremacies, which was how we established the huge Skyhorn Alliance. After dealing with us, His Majesty the Kiliocosm Sovereign naturally will not be able to detect this small kiliocosm. Huh? Is it that simple? Lin Feng found it a little unbelievable. There were only 3 of them. It seemed to be much easier than he had imagined. That's right, it's that simple. However, that's only relative. In the small kiliocosm, who would dare to attack our Skyhorn Alliance? They're wary of retribution, so our Skyhorn Alliance is undoubtedly very safe. The Dark Domain Supremacy is an exception. Your appearance has disrupted this invisible balance. Moreover, your strength is outstanding, which is why it feels easy to you. Lin Feng nodded. That was indeed the case. He was very strong, and even dealing with 3 2-star supremacies could be considered easy for him. But what about the other controllers? To other controllers, 3 2-star supremacies were great and powerful hegemons. Forget about killing them, it would be difficult to even defeat them. How strong are the remaining 2 alliance leaders? The first alliance leader has 230 million worlds. As for the third alliance leader, he only has 150 million worlds. The Dark Domain Supremacy can deal with both of them. Lin Feng nodded. It seemed like as long as nothing unexpected happened, dealing with the Skyhorn Alliance should not be a problem. However, Lin Feng thought of a problem. Even if he killed the first and third alliance leaders, the second alliance leader, Supremacy Heavenly Might, would still remain in his internal Kiliakosm domain. He would still be detected by the Kiliakosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance. That way, even if he killed the first alliance leader and the third alliance leader, what was the point? Just as Lin Feng was hesitating, Supremacy Heavenly Might took the initiative to say, "Dark Domain Supremacy. His Majesty the Kiliakosm Sovereign can still sense that I am in your internal Kiliakosm domain. However, there's actually a very simple solution. The other controllers can't resolve it, but you can." "Oh? What method?" "It's very simple. I request to undergo discorporation. Once I've discorporated, my perfected spirit will be completely obliterated by the reincarnation realm in your internal Kiliakosm domain. Even my perfected spirit will be obliterated. Then I will lose any imprints from the past. Even His Majesty the Kiliakosm Sovereign will not be able to detect me." Lin Feng's heart clenched. Discorporation was not terrifying, but if even the perfected spirit was obliterated after the discorporation, it would be terrifying. The Kiliakosm Sovereign naturally could not detect him, because that would be true death. "Then, wouldn't you fall?" Lin Feng frowned. "Fall? Perhaps. If I were in the body of an ordinary controller, I would indeed fall, and would never have a chance to be revived. However, you have transformed into a universe, and have a chance of becoming a true Kiliakosm Sovereign in the future. That is different. True Kiliakosm Sovereigns will all evolve their internal Kiliakosm domain into a true small Kiliakosm. A small Kiliakosm is actually no different from a true small Kiliakosm. At that time, with just a thought from you, you can rebuild a perfected spirit that was once obliterated in your internal Kiliakosm domain, and awaken my memories. At that time, it will be equivalent to resurrecting me." Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. There was actually such a secret technique. He knew that it was impossible for ordinary controllers to give rise to controllers in their internal world or Kiliakosm domain. None of them could be born. This was because controllers themselves were transcendents, and needed to take away a portion of the power of the internal world. More importantly, they would conflict with the internal Kiliakosm domain. However, true Kiliakosm sovereigns could develop a small Kiliakosm in their body. That would be different. They could still transcend in the small Kiliakosm of a true Kiliakosm sovereign. Of course, the prerequisite was that the Kiliakosm sovereign was willing to let them transcend. However, if some people had made great contributions, the Kiliakosm sovereign was naturally willing to let them transcend. It was just a small loss of energy, and was not worth mentioning. Lin Feng asked Supremacy Vicissitude again. As expected, he received Supremacy Vicissitude's affirmation. Supremacy Vicissitude even said that if Lin Feng felt that it was a little risky, Supremacy Vicissitude could also undergo discorporation. They were completely tied to Lin Feng. If Lin Feng did not become a true Kiliakosm sovereign in the future and develop a small Kiliakosm, or if he developed a small Kiliakosm but did not keep his promise to help them rebuild their perfected spirits and awaken their memories, it would be equivalent to complete annihilation. This way, he was completely tied to Lin Feng. It was also a gamble. Of course, Lin Feng did not agree to Supremacy Vicissitude's discorporation. In any case, the Kiliakosm sovereign of the Opulent Lodge had no time to care about this small Kiliakosm. Lin Feng still had many other uses for Supremacy Vicissitude. As for Supremacy Heavenly Might, Lin Feng said solemnly, "Thank you for your trouble, Supremacy Heavenly Might. Don't worry. I promise that if I develop a small Kiliakosm one day, I will definitely help to rebuild your perfected spirit, awaken your memories, and revive you. With this promise from the Dark Domain Supremacy, I can rest assured." With that, Supremacy Heavenly Might's internal universe collapsed inch by inch. Even Lin Feng's internal Kiliakosm domain could not accommodate the violent energy, and he moved it out directly. Only the perfected spirit of Supremacy Heavenly Might was left. Then, Lin Feng guided the perfected spirit of Supremacy Heavenly Might into the reincarnation realm and completely obliterated it. Even Lin Feng could not sense any aura of Supremacy Heavenly Might. He could be considered fallen now. Only when Lin Feng became a true Kiliacosm sovereign and his internal Kiliacosm evolved into a small Kiliacosm could he rebuild Supremacy Heavenly Might's perfected spirit and revive him. Watching as Supremacy Heavenly Might's perfected spirit was obliterated, Lin Feng also sighed. An unfulfilled hope and an illusory promise are actually enough to make someone willing to sacrifice themselves. Moreover, it's a 2-star supremacy. Up until now, Lin Feng still could not experience that feeling for himself. He would never place his hopes on an illusory promise, or on someone. That would be too insecure. Actually, Supremacy Heavenly Might no longer had a choice. Between falling and a little hope, what would he choose? It goes without saying. Moreover, a potential future true Kiliacosm sovereign is enough for Supremacy Heavenly Might to place his bets on. Dark Domain Supremacy, although you only need to deal with the first and third alliance leaders, you have to kill those 2 alliance leaders immediately. Otherwise, it's very likely that they'll spread the news. At that time, there may be an emergency response from the Kiliacosm sovereign who has been monitoring this small Kiliacosm. Lin Feng nodded. This was completely different from dealing with the Opulent Lodge. Apart from the 2-star supremacies, the most important thing was to deal with the Kiliacosm sovereign in the medium Kiliacosm. He could only kill the first alliance leader and the third alliance leader as fast as possible. Only then could he ensure that he could cut off the detection of the Kiliacosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance. I will formulate the strategy in detail and set things up perfectly. Lin Feng began to close his eyes. He asked Supremacy Roundheart to investigate the situation carefully. Coupled with the information from Supremacy Heavenly Might, gradually, a perfect battle plan was formulated in Lin Feng's heart. There was only one word for the decree of this battle. Quick. Only by acting decisively to solve the problem and being quick could he kill the 2-star supremacies completely before they could react, and prevent them from spreading the news. Otherwise, Lin Feng would be in big trouble. The Skyhorn Alliance had been paying close attention to the direction of the Opulent Lodge, or rather, whether there was any movement in the sphere of influence of First Light. But up until now, there seemed to be no news from Supremacy Heavenly Might. It's been an entire day. Why hasn't there been any news from the second alliance leader? The third alliance leader spoke slowly. No matter what, one day was enough for Supremacy Heavenly Might to probe Lin Feng. Even if the probe failed, he would send a message or return. The only possibility was that Supremacy Heavenly Might was in trouble. However, the possibility was very low. Who was the Supremacy Heavenly Might? He was the second alliance leader of the Skyhorn Alliance, and was even stronger than the third alliance leader. His internal Kiliacosm domain contained nearly 200 million worlds. Even if he was not a match, he had more than enough capability to escape. Who could kill Supremacy Heavenly Might? A 1-star supremacy below stood up and said, "Alliance leaders, our spies in First Light also did not discover any movement in First Light. That's strange." The many supremacies frowned, and the first alliance leader was no exception. He was very confident in Supremacy Heavenly Might. Otherwise, he wouldn't have allowed Supremacy Heavenly Might to personally take the risk to head to the First Light. Let's wait a little longer. Perhaps the second alliance leader will send back a message soon, the first alliance leader said. He planned to wait a little longer. If they still did not receive any news, he and the third alliance leader would personally head to the First Light. Buzz. Suddenly, an invisible fluctuation seemed to approach silently from afar. It quickly pounced towards the Skyhorn Alliance headquarters. Something's wrong. Fight! The first alliance leader shouted with a sharp gaze. However, it was already too late. The next moment, that invisible fluctuation descended. All the controller supremacies in the hall, including the 2 alliance leaders, were all immobile, as if they were frozen in an instant. The first alliance leader's eyes widened, and he maintained a shocked expression and movements. Boom! The terrifying power of worlds descended and swept towards the 2 alliance leaders in an instant. It had already exceeded the limit of what the 2 alliance leaders could withstand. That was the power of a total of 450 million worlds. Thud, thud. The 2 alliance leaders, renowned 2-star supremacies, did not even react. Even their internal kiliocosm domains were instantly reduced to dust. Swoosh! At this moment, a figure descended from the sky. It was Lin Feng. He silently infiltrated the Skyhorn Alliance headquarters. However, he could not approach the hall without alerting the two Alliance leaders. Hence, he simply used the rules of time to stop time in the entire void within billions of miles of the Skyhorn Alliance headquarters. The load is really huge. I almost couldn't take it. Looks like having more targets also means a huge drain on the rules of time. Lin Feng muttered softly. There were still so many one-star supremacies in the hall, and there were still countless ordinary controllers in the Skyhorn Alliance headquarters. So many controller supremacies and two-star supremacies were stopped at once. Hence, the burden on Lin Feng increased, and he could only stop time for a few breaths. Fortunately, a few breaths were enough. With Lin Feng's current strength, the power of 450 million worlds could crush down at once. It was naturally not difficult to deal with two mere two-star supremacies, who did not even have 300 million worlds, and whose time was stopped on top of that. In a flash, two-star supremacies, the dignified alliance leaders of the Skyhorn Alliance, were instantly killed. Since the two-star supremacies had already been killed instantly by Lin Feng, he did not stop time anymore. The remaining people could not be detected by the Kiliocosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance. Hence, they were no longer a threat and were not worth mentioning. Lin Feng also retracted the rules of time. What's going on? Heavens! This is the Dark Domain Supremacy. Lin Feng. He's attacking our Skyhorn Alliance headquarters? Why can't I sense the auras of the two Alliance leaders? Could the Alliance leaders have fallen? Impossible. Who could have killed two Alliance leaders in such a short period of time? Many supremacies could not believe it. All of them unleashed the power of worlds in a mighty manner, as if they wanted to fight Lin Feng to the death. However, Lin Feng stood with his hands behind his back, quietly standing in the hall. He was not afraid at all, and his expression was very calm. He was calm and composed as he said evenly, "Your first Alliance leader, third Alliance leader, and the second Alliance leader from before have all been killed by me. You have two choices, surrender or die." Lin Feng did not waste his breath. Although he treated the controllers relatively preferentially, and would not kill them all like he did those celestial devils, the circumstances were unusual now. Time was short, so Lin Feng naturally would not show mercy. He would still kill them if he had to. What? The Alliance leaders have really fallen. For a moment, the entire hall fell incomparably silent. All the controllers looked at each other, not knowing what to do. However, not a single controller dared to attack Lin Feng. A man's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Lin Feng could be considered to have a vicious reputation now. He had instantly subdued the entire Skyhorn Alliance alone. With the deaths of the three Alliance leaders, the remaining many supremacies were just meat on the chopping board, and at his mercy. If they did not surrender, they could only die. "We are willing to surrender." The many supremacies looked at each other. In the end, faced with Lin Feng's viciousness, no one dared to resist. All of them recognized the reality and surrendered to Lin Feng. "Good. You've made the right choice." A smile appeared on Lin Feng's lips. This was the best outcome. Moreover, everything went very smoothly from the beginning to the end. It was so smooth that Lin Feng even felt that everything was so easy. Rumble. At this moment, the void seemed to be torn apart all of a sudden. A huge beam of light descended from the sky. The terrifying might descended in a majestic manner, and instantly attracted the attention of countless people. That's... Lin Feng's expression changed abruptly. He thought of a possibility, the worst possibility. The Ascension passage. A serious sense of crisis rose in Lin Feng's heart. It's the Ascension passage. How can our Skyhorn Alliance be like the Opulent Lodge? Our Skyhorn Alliance can contact His Majesty the Kiliocosm Sovereign at any time, and His Majesty the Kiliocosm Sovereign pays close attention to us. No one can be impudent here. Looks like the death of the three Alliance leaders can be avenged now. As soon as they saw this huge beam of light, many supremacies in the hall became excited. They all knew and had seen this Ascension passage before. The Skyhorn Alliance was different from the Opulent Lodge. In reality, very few members of the Opulent Lodge knew about the medium Kiliakosm, the Dissension Passage, and the Kiliakosm Sovereign. Only the core members knew about these. To the Opulent Lodge, these were secrets. However, the Skyhorn Alliance was different. As long as one joined the Skyhorn Alliance, even ordinary supremacies knew that there was a Kiliakosm Sovereign and the existence of the Dissension Passage. As for these one-star supremacies, they could already be considered the upper echelons of the Skyhorn Alliance. They had even seen the Dissension Passage before. Now that they saw the Dissension Passage open, they were naturally very excited. In their hearts, the supreme Kiliakosm Sovereign was invincible. Once the Dissension Passage was activated, no matter what enemy it was, they would be crushed. The Dissension Passage. It's really the Dissension Passage. But why did the Kiliakosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance activate the Dissension Passage so quickly? Lin Feng's expression turned very grim. He could not figure it out. Everything before had already been carefully planned. How could there be a mistake? Could it be that the Kiliakosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance had some kind of secret technique and divine ability that could observe the exact situation in the small Kiliakosm? This did not seem very likely either. Even as powerful as Kiliakosm Sovereigns were, they could not really see through the small Kiliakosm and learn about the situation inside. They could only make deductions or use certain methods to get a vague understanding of the situation. No, it should be the first or third alliance leaders of the Skyhorn Alliance who sent a message to inform the Kiliakosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance in advance. Looks like I've underestimated the Skyhorn Alliance and two-star supremacies too much. Every two-star supremacy can only achieve what they have through hardships. Some supremacies even have some special methods that can give advance warnings. Perhaps before my rules of time descended, the two alliance leaders already realized the danger and informed the Kiliakosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance in advance. Lin Feng deduced and analyzed it carefully. In reality, his analysis was already close to the mark. The first alliance leader of the Skyhorn Alliance was meticulous. The moment Lin Feng's rules of time descended, he had already noticed it. Hence, in an instant, he sent a message to the Kiliakosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance. Even if there was only a trace of transmission, the Kiliakosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance would definitely be able to sense it when Lin Feng killed the first and third alliance leaders right on the heels. Hence, it only made sense for the Kiliakosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance to instantly lock onto the location of the small Kiliakosm and open the Dissension Passage. It was not that Lin Feng's plan was not thorough, nor was it that Lin Feng's rules of time were not powerful. He had already tried his best to achieve perfection. Unfortunately, his plan still failed. Once the Dissension Passage was opened, it was very likely that some powerful two-star supremacies, even two-star supremacies above the billion level, would descend from the medium Kiliakosm. After all, the Kiliakosm Sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance took this small Kiliakosm very seriously. Once the powerful supremacies of the medium Kiliakosm really descended, the consequences would be unthinkable. Even Lin Feng would be in danger. No, I can't let the Dissension Passage open successfully. I can't let any other supremacy descend from the medium Kiliakosm. Almost immediately, Lin Feng made the decision. He had to stop the Dissension Passage from opening and the other supremacies from coming through the Dissension Passage, even at all costs. Lin Feng no longer had time to explain. The moment he charged towards the Dissension Passage, he immediately asked Supremacy Vicissitude. What? Looks like the plan has failed. Once the Dissension Passage is activated, it's impossible to stop it, unless the Dissension Passage is destroyed. Supremacy Vicissitude also quickly gave his answer. Huh? Can the Dissension Passage be destroyed? Of course it can be destroyed. The Dissension Passage is forcefully opened up in a small Kiliakosm by the Kiliakosm Sovereign with powerful strength. Moreover, the Kiliakosm Sovereign also needs to use his strength to maintain the stability of the Dissension Passage. After all, the resistance of a small Kiliakosm is still very great. As long as the Dissension Passage can be destroyed with absolute strength, the descent naturally be stopped. However, in that case you will have to face the power of a Kiliakosm Sovereign head-on. Even if it is weakened countless times by the small kiliocosm, that is still the power of a kiliocosm sovereign. Lin Feng fell into deep thought. He recalled that back when the indefinite sect was fighting with the opulent lodge, the opulent lodge was originally about to open the dissension passage. However, they were ambushed by the indefinite sect master. In the end, it failed halfway, and the dissension passage was not opened. If the indefinite sect master could do it, why couldn't Lin Feng? Of course, the situation Lin Feng was facing now was far more complicated than the situation the indefinite sect master had faced back then. Back then, the kiliocosm sovereign of the opulent lodge had not paid much attention to this small kiliocosm at all. He might not have diverted much of his strength to the dissension passage. This time, however, for the kiliocosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance to respond so quickly and open the dissension passage, Lin Feng was certain that he must have diverted most of his strength to open the dissension passage. It was very tricky, but no matter how tricky it was, Lin Feng had to do it. So what if it's the kiliocosm sovereign? Lin Feng's battle intent was overflowing, burning like a raging inferno. He flew to the bottom of the dissension passage immediately. He could clearly sense the terrifying power contained in the dissension passage. There was even the power of the small kiliocosm. The two forces were warring each other in a frenzy. However, in the end, the power in the dissension passage gained the upper hand and maintained the dissension passage. This dissension passage had already been opened. However, Lin Feng could not stop it halfway. Then, he only had one solution, a very risky solution, to destroy the dissension passage. Lin Feng was right below the dissension passage. He looked up. It was pitch black and he could not see anything clearly. However, he could clearly sense that the other end of the passage felt infinite and contained a vast, profound, and daunting aura. Lin Feng knew very well that it was the medium kiliocosm. Countless supremacies yearned for the medium kiliocosm. Be it 2-star or 3-star supremacies, all of them yearned for the medium kiliocosm. However, apart from the kiliocosm sovereign, no one could break through the boundary and leave the small kiliocosm to ascend to the medium kiliocosm. Kiliocosm sovereigns were great entities that truly transcended worldly affairs. Their lives were eternal, their status supreme, and they were the true rulers of the myriad worlds. But now, Lin Feng had to battle with a great kiliocosm sovereign. Even though it was a battle from afar, the thought of it thrilled him. Whether you are the kiliocosm sovereign or someone else, the dissension passage must not be opened. Myriad origin integration. Break! Lin Feng roared. The kiliocosm domain phantom floating above his head seemed to have materialized at this moment, and everything fused into one. A secret technique. This was an offensive secret technique that Lin Feng had mastered back then. However, it had been a long time since he had used it. Now, at the critical moment, Lin Feng unleashed his strongest strike, heedless of the cost. Boom! How massive was the power of Lin Feng's worlds at this moment. Perhaps even Lin Feng himself did not know very well. All along, he had been using the boundary stones and world origin to grow worlds or even kiliocosm domains from the chaotic lotus in a frenzy. The kiliocosm domain in his body was too huge, and it was difficult to count the number of living beings. They were simply infinite and innumerable as sand. However, the internal kiliocosm domain was too huge. There were too many worlds and too many living beings, so Lin Feng could not perfectly control every trace of power in his body. This time, he used the myriad origin integration technique, condensing all the worlds in the internal kiliocosm domain into one in an instant. Even though it was only for an instant, it could blast out power that far exceeded ordinary levels. Lin Feng even had a feeling that even if he encountered the 4 supremacies including supremacy vicissitude again, he was actually confident that he could kill them instantly. For a long time, Lin Feng had relied too much on the rules of time. When he encountered trouble, the first thing Lin Feng thought of was the rules of time. This could not be considered wrong. After all, the rules of time were also a type of power and ability that Lin Feng had mastered. It was a power that belonged to Lin Feng himself. However, relying on the rules of time for a long time had almost made Lin Feng forget that he was actually already very strong. Even without the rules of time, he was still a hegemon. This was especially the case when using the secret technique at this moment. The dark domain supremacy is actually so powerful. No wonder the first light could rise to power rapidly. The dark domain supremacy is unimaginably powerful. Even the three alliance leaders back then seemed to be far inferior to the dark domain supremacy. So this is a 2-star supremacy? He's just too powerful. From so far away, that terrifying aura even makes my heart palpitate. I'm afraid I won't even have the courage to attack. He can actually resist the Ascension passage alone. Has he gone insane? The controller supremacies in the hall of the Skyhorn Alliance saw that Lin Feng was like a living god of war, trying to stop the Ascension passage with his power alone. This was simply too insane. Some were impressed, but some were disdainful. They felt that Lin Feng was basically mad, and failure was inevitable. Who could stop the Ascension passage? In particular, the Ascension passage had already been completely activated. That was practically facing the Kiliacosm sovereign directly. Boom! Lin Feng dared to stop the Ascension passage. Moreover, no one could stop his determination now. When his 450 million worlds condensed into one, the power that instantly erupted struck the Ascension passage hard. The entire Ascension passage shook violently. Ripples spread in all directions in the void. The Ascension passage was shaking, but that was all. It was only shaking. Then nothing happened after. The Ascension passage was still there. At the same time, an unfamiliar and domineering force crashed into Lin Feng through the Ascension passage. Thud! A muffled sound came from Lin Feng's body, as if he had suffered a heavy blow. His body stopped moving at once. In the next moment, the internal Kiliacosm domain in Lin Feng's body shook wildly. Worlds collapsed in a frenzy. In the blink of an eye, millions, then tens of millions of worlds collapsed. Chaotic Lotus! Suppress! Lin Feng roared. The chaotic lotus quickly appeared to suppress the void. A Kiliacosm sovereign. That was the power of a Kiliacosm sovereign. Lin Feng's face was filled with madness. Even if the power of the Kiliacosm sovereign was reduced down to only a trace by the small Kiliacosm, perhaps only 1 in a billion, just this 1 in a billion almost overwhelmed Lin Feng. He had lost tens of millions of worlds in an instant. If not for the fact that the chaotic lotus had successfully suppressed the void and stabilized the internal Kiliacosm domain, this little amount of power would probably be enough for Lin Feng to lose worlds continuously, and eventually lose hundreds of millions of worlds. Kiliacosm sovereign. Lin Feng bit down hard and stared intently at the top of the Ascension passage. Through the Ascension passage, there seemed to be nothing above. It was empty and pitch black. However, Lin Feng felt as if an eye was staring coldly at him through the Ascension passage. That was the Kiliacosm sovereign. That must be the Kiliacosm sovereign. At this moment, Lin Feng's entire body went cold. His tremendous battle intent seemed to have dissipated without a trace. The Kiliacosm sovereign was the great and supreme Kiliacosm sovereign, the true ruler of the myriad worlds. His life was eternal and he was transcendent. Such an entity was invincible to begin with. How could anyone contend against him? No, so what if he's a Kiliacosm sovereign? Kiliacosm sovereigns also cultivated step by step since they were weak beings. The Kiliacosm sovereign isn't invulnerable. Moreover, I am in the small Kiliacosm now. The power of a Kiliacosm sovereign is only 1 in 10,000, not even 1 in 10,000, but 1 in a billion. Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. His eyes burned with passion again, filled with battle intent. The Kiliacosm sovereign might really be invincible, but in a small Kiliacosm at a time like this, the Kiliacosm sovereign was not invincible. Moreover, Lin Feng only wanted to destroy the Ascension passage, not really fight the Kiliacosm sovereign. If he did not even have this bit of courage, how could he survive the epical cataclysm? How could he develop a small Kiliacosm and become a Kiliacosm sovereign? Boom! The Ascension passage shook violently. At the same time, Lin Feng saw something pitch-black object carrying a terrifying power descending through the descending passage. Ascension. Someone was descending. Moreover, it was very likely a 2-star supremacy, or even a controller supremacy above the billion level. Once this supremacy descended and restrained Lin Feng, and more supremacies descended one after another, the situation would be hopeless. Lin Feng could use the spatial disk to warp space and escape, but the first light would probably be destroyed. Moreover, it would completely disrupt Lin Feng's plan. He might even lose that ancient battlefield and never be able to enter it again. There was only a billion years left until the epical cataclysm. Lin Feng had to fight for all the power he could to increase his strength. Time was what Lin Feng needed. No, I can't let more supremacies of the Skyhorn Alliance descend successfully. Lin Feng pondered for a moment and quickly made his decision. At this point, he had to give it his all. He had to risk his life. Buzz. In the next moment, a strange fluctuation emitted from the Kiliacosm domain in Lin Feng's body, instantly enveloping the entire Dissension passage. Stop time. At this moment, Lin Feng could only risk his life. He would use the rules of time, even if his internal Kiliacosm domain had to withstand a huge burden. This was his only chance to destroy the Dissension passage. Boom! The rules of time descended. In the next moment, time stopped. Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain suddenly rumbled. Even the Dissension passage was shaking violently. For the first time, Lin Feng's rules of time actually could not suppress it. However, Lin Feng was clearly prepared to risk his life this time. Hence, ignoring the insane burden on his internal Kiliacosm domain, he even took the initiative to break down the worlds in his internal Kiliacosm domain to obtain massive power to support the rules of time. Stop! Lin Feng roared furiously. Tens of millions of worlds in his internal Kiliacosm domain collapsed instantly. Lin Feng took the initiative to disintegrate them, turning them into a terrifying power that supported the rules of time. At the same time, the power of the rules of time increased explosively. Finally, everything stopped, including the Dissension passage that was still shaking violently previously. Everything stopped. Only Lin Feng did not stop. This was also Lin Feng's best opportunity. As time stopped, Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain was enduring the collapse of a large number of worlds at almost every moment. The collapse of tens of millions of worlds, or even more than 100 million worlds, had caused Lin Feng heavy losses. However, in order to stop or even destroy the Dissension passage, Lin Feng had no choice. He could only fight to the death at all costs. Break! Lin Feng gathered all his strength. Almost the moment time stopped, he unleashed all his strength and struck the Dissension passage hard. The Dissension passage was not considered strong. Back then, even the indefinite sect master could destroy the Dissension passage that had yet to be completely activated, let alone Lin Feng. However, the key was the power of the Kiliacosm sovereign attached to the Dissension passage. A large amount of Kiliacosm sovereign's power was attached to this Dissension passage in front of him. This meant that the Kiliacosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance indeed took this small Kiliacosm very seriously, and spent a large amount of power to maintain this Dissension passage. The reason Lin Feng had lost so much of his internal Kiliacosm domain, even more than 100 million worlds, was that he was stopping not just a Dissension passage, but a large amount of Kiliacosm sovereign's power on the Dissension passage. That was the power of a Kiliacosm sovereign. Anything that was related to or connected to the Kiliacosm sovereign was unfathomable. There would undoubtedly be a huge price to pay to stop time. However, no matter the price, Lin Feng would not hesitate. The rules of time stopped the Dissension passage and the power of the Kiliacosm sovereign. Hence, facing the full power strike of the power of Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain, at this moment the Dissension passage could no longer withstand it. The power of the Kiliacosm sovereign did not move at all because everything was stopped. Boom! With Lin Feng's full power strike, the Dissension passage shook violently. Cracks appeared on it, and they kept increasing. They were dense as spiderwebs, sprawling all over the Dissension passage. Crack! Finally, the Dissension passage cracked, and bits of light scattered as it seemed ready to dissipate at once. At the same time, Lin Feng also staggered. Finally, he could not withstand the burden and backlash from stopping time anymore. He retracted the rules of time. However, as the rules of time were revoked, the Dissension passage could not be stabilized. Even though the power of the Kiliakosm sovereign on the Dissension passage seemed to have increased again, it was still unable to stabilize the Dissension passage. Instead, it sped up the collapse of the Dissension passage. Finally, the Dissension passage turned into specks of light in an instant and dissipated completely. Lin Feng vaguely saw an eye in the Dissension passage, staring intently at him. A figure had already descended from the Dissension passage, but as the Dissension passage collapsed, the figure also let out a scream before disappearing. "I finally destroyed the Dissension passage, but the price?" Lin Feng heaved a sigh of relief. The Kiliakosm domain corridor had completely calmed down. After destroying the Dissension passage, it would not be easy for that Kiliakosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance to find this small Kiliakosm again, because he could no longer locate it. If he searched for it slowly, it might take at least a few years. However, Lin Feng knew very well that he had paid a huge price for this battle. A magnificent palace was filled with an austere and solemn aura. At this moment, in the hall of the palace, a man in a golden robe was sitting high up. The man's face was unclear. It appeared as if a light enveloped him, and he gave off a heavy authority. Crunch. The golden-robed man's fingers trembled slightly, and right on the heels of that, the beam of light in front of him completely dissipated. A figure staggered out of it and staggered into the hall. This figure seemed to be fearful and in trepidation. He hurriedly knelt down and prostrated himself on the ground. He said respectfully, "Your Majesty, I was incompetent and failed to descend. Please punish me." The supremacy sky sigil in front of him was a dignified 2-star supremacy, and even a top expert with more than 10 billion worlds. He was not at the billion level but the 10 billion level. Unfortunately, the Dissension passage was destroyed. Even Supremacy Sky Sigil could only be forced to return to the medium Kiliakosm. The golden-robed man was the Kiliakosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance. His face was unclear, and there was no knowing what his expression was like. However, at a time like this, Supremacy Sky Sigil was very terrified. He knew how furious His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign must be. After all, His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign had personally opened the Dissension passage. But now all his efforts had been in vain, and had been ruined by a mere controller of a small Kiliakosm. However, Supremacy Sky Sigil did not know that the great Kiliakosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance was not as furious as he had imagined. Instead, emotions surged through his heart. This was because the Kiliakosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance had sensed a very strange power from that controller in the small Kiliakosm just now. The Kiliakosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance could not be mistaken about that power, for it was the power of time. The rules of time have appeared again. The Kiliakosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance took a long look in the direction of the Dissension passage. The destruction of the Dissension passage, and even the origin of that small Kiliakosm were actually nothing to the Kiliakosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance. What really made a ripple appear in his calm heart was the power of time. It was a power that even a Kiliakosm sovereign yearned for. No matter what, he had to find that small Kiliakosm again, or even capture that controller who had grasped the power of time. This might be even more important than the small Kiliakosm origin. The Dissension passage has been destroyed? This is impossible. That was the Dissension passage personally opened by His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign. It was actually destroyed. Incredible, truly incredible. A 2-star supremacy can destroy His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign's Dissension passage. The Skyhorn Alliance will probably cease to exist. The many controllers of the Skyhorn Alliance looked at the Dissension passage that disappeared in the Kiliakosm domain corridor. All of them found it unbelievable. In their hearts, His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign was invincible. Even a little of his power was not something a controller in a small Kiliakosm could resist. But now, they had seen with their own eyes that the Dissension passage personally opened by His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign had already been destroyed, and by force. It was as if the myth of the invincibility of the Kiliakosm sovereign had been shattered just like that. At the same time, they looked at Lin Feng with even more reverence. Swoosh! When Lin Feng flew back to the hall, Even though it seemed like Lin Feng was also severely injured, no controller dared to resist. All of them lowered their heads and chose to submit. You, take me to the treasure vault of the Skyhorn Alliance. The first light will send people to receive the rest soon. From now on, there will be no more Skyhorn Alliance, only the first light. Lin Feng sat high on the throne, giving orders. After paying such a huge price, he naturally had to completely take over the Skyhorn Alliance. After all, in terms of power, the Skyhorn Alliance was much stronger than even the Opulent Lodge. I hope the collection of the Skyhorn Alliance won't disappoint me, Lin Feng muttered softly. He had paid too high a price this time. He had to make up for it with the Skyhorn Alliance. Otherwise, the gains would not make up for the losses. Not long after, Supremacy Roundheart rushed to the Skyhorn Alliance with a large number of experts from First Light. Seeing that Lin Feng was safe and sound, Supremacy Roundheart finally relaxed. Then, Supremacy Roundheart took over Lin Feng's role and began to oversee the Skyhorn Alliance. He commanded the people from First Light to take over the Skyhorn Alliance completely. They had to take over all the forces of the Skyhorn Alliance in the shortest time possible without any mistakes. Seeing Supremacy Roundheart's methodical arrangements, Lin Feng was also very assured. Supremacy Roundheart was clearly better at arranging these trivial matters. The most important thing for him now was to collect and plunder boundary stones. Hence, after instructing Supremacy Roundheart, Lin Feng got someone to bring him to the treasure vault of the Skyhorn Alliance, especially the treasure vaults of the three alliance leaders. Although many treasures were in the Kiliacosm domains of the three alliance leaders, most of them were still stored in the treasure vault as common treasures of the Skyhorn Alliance. Among them were boundary stones that Lin Feng needed very much. Supremacy, this is the treasure vault. Normally, only one of the three alliance leaders can open it. The one who led the way was a one-star Supremacy. After seeing that there was no hope for the Skyhorn Alliance, he actively joined First Light, and his performance was passable. However, Lin Feng did not care. He was more concerned about the collection in this treasure vault. Seeing this treasure vault, Lin Feng could tell at a glance that there was a restriction. However, this restriction was not profound. Even a two-star Supremacy could break it by force. Boom! Lin Feng casually waved his hand and broke this restriction. Without asking the one-star Supremacy to lead the way further, Lin Feng stepped directly into the treasure vault. All kinds of treasures were piled up like mountains in the treasure vault. Lin Feng felt that First Light already had a deep foundation, but it was nothing compared to the Skyhorn Alliance. The Skyhorn Alliance had already begun to make arrangements in the small Kiliacosm a long time ago. Moreover, there was a two-star Supremacy presiding over it. Its power expanded rapidly, and it was far from what the Opulent Lodge and First Light could compare to. This was because over the years, the various treasures collected were simply innumerable. Of course, most of them had been used by the three two-star Supremacies, but many were still left behind. This is World Origin? There are actually still 20 million portions of World Origin left here. Looks like they were left behind by the three two-star Supremacies to reward the controllers of the Skyhorn Alliance and to maintain the normal operation of the Skyhorn Alliance. A smile appeared on Lin Feng's lips. He would not hesitate to help himself with these 20 million portions of World Origin. If he had enough boundary stones, just these 20 million portions of World Origin could even support the growth of more than 100 million worlds in Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain. After all, relying on the chaotic lotus to devour boundary stones and grow worlds would only consume a very small part of the World Origin. Lin Feng would not use the World Origin to nurture worlds. That would be too wasteful and inefficient. It was far inferior to devouring boundary stones to grow worlds. Apart from that, Lin Feng also discovered a large number of boundary stones. Boundary stones filled the place and simply piled up like mountains. There were simply too many of these boundary stones, ranging from ordinary boundary stones to high-quality boundary stones. They had all been plundered by the Skyhorn Alliance over the years. A considerable part of it was directly rewarded to the controllers of the Skyhorn Alliance by the upper echelons of the Skyhorn Alliance. After all, ordinary-grade boundary stones were also very attractive to ordinary controllers. Back then, Supremacy Autumn and the others only had a boundary stone for a few hundred worlds. There was no knowing how happy they would be if they were rewarded with a boundary stone with a limit of 1,000 worlds. If a large faction wanted to develop and retain its members, boundary stones were indispensable. The upper echelons of the Skyhorn Alliance had no use for ordinary boundary stones either. Be it those 1-star or 2-star supremacies, they had no use for these ordinary boundary stones. Hence, after many years of accumulation, unintentionally, a large number of boundary stones had accumulated in the Skyhorn Alliance's treasure vault. These boundary stones might not be of much use to 1-star and 2-star supremacies. However, to Lin Feng this was the greatest tonic. Lin Feng checked the situation in the internal Kiliacosm domain carefully. He had really suffered heavy losses. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was severely injured. He had used the rules of time and stopped the power of a Kiliacosm sovereign. That little amount of power of the Kiliacosm sovereign was nothing relative to the actual Kiliacosm sovereign. Moreover, the small Kiliacosm had stopped 99% of the Kiliacosm sovereign's power. However, just that little amount had already caused Lin Feng to suffer heavy losses and bear a huge burden. He had lost 150 million worlds in his internal Kiliacosm domain. That was 150 million worlds. Could be said to be the greatest loss Lin Feng had ever suffered. In fact, if the Ascension passage was just a little stronger, the Kiliacosm domain in Lin Feng's body might be the first to collapse. Originally, there were only 450 million worlds. Now only 300 million were left. Fortunately, the treasure vault of the Skyhorn Alliance did not disappoint Lin Feng. Looking at the mountain of boundary stones, he roughly estimated that there were probably about 100 million of them. If he plundered more in the sphere of influence of the Skyhorn Alliance, he would definitely be able to obtain tens of millions more boundary stones. Then, he would be able to make up for his losses. However, if he had not lost so much, he might have made a huge killing and obtained more than 100 million boundary stones. His overall strength could even reach 600 million worlds, and he might not be too far from becoming a billion-level controller. Unfortunately, the entire plan was in vain. Lin Feng could only hope to make up for his losses. Swoosh! Lin Feng grabbed with his hand and threw all these boundary stones into the internal Kiliacosm domain. These boundary stones were all of rather good quality, and finally put Lin Feng at ease a little. Those are 1-star boundary stones. Suddenly, as Lin Feng was moving all these boundary stones into the internal Kiliacosm domain, he realized that there were 5 very exquisite-looking boxes. He reached out and opened the boxes. Buzz! Violent fluctuations suddenly emitted from the box. They were fluctuations from high-quality boundary stones, 1-star boundary stones, in fact. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were a total of 5 boundary stones, and all of them were actually 1-star boundary stones. Lin Feng could not help but feel excited. The foundation of the Skyhorn Alliance was actually so deep. There were 5 1-star boundary stones. No wonder there were so many 1-star supremacies in the Skyhorn Alliance. They had probably been rewarded with 1-star boundary stones from the Skyhorn Alliance. It was not easy to obtain one 1-star boundary stone in an ordinary small Kiliacosm. No matter how deep the foundation of the Skyhorn Alliance was, it was impossible for them to obtain so many 1-star boundary stones without anyone knowing. Could they be sent down by the Skyhorn Alliance in the medium Kiliacosm? Lin Feng thought of a possibility. Considering how much the Kiliacosm sovereign of the Skyhorn Alliance valued this small Kiliacosm, it was indeed very likely that he would bestow some 1-star boundary stones. Lin Feng also learned from Supremacy Vicissitude that the medium Kiliacosm was abundant in resources to begin with, and had many boundary stones. In addition, the Kiliacosm sovereigns could also wage war in countless small Kiliacosms, so they could also collect and plunder boundary stones. Hence, there were many 1-star boundary stones and 2-star boundary stones. Perhaps there were only slightly fewer 3-star boundary stones. After all, 3-star boundary stones could be counted on one hand in small Kiliacosms. Some small Kiliacosms might not even be able to produce a 3-star boundary stone in a few epochs. However, there were many 1-star and 2-star boundary stones. But now they benefited Lin Feng instead. There were 5 one-star boundary stones, and each was at the 10 million level. It was simply a pleasant surprise. Swoosh! Lin Feng grabbed all 5 one-star boundary stones and observed them carefully. He realized that the 5 one-star boundary stones were all between 30 million and 60 million level. With 5 of them added together, they could grow at least 5 kiliocosm domains comparable to 150 million worlds, and might even reach 200 million worlds. This was simply a timely relief for Lin Feng. All his losses were made up for at once. Devour! Lin Feng did not hesitate anymore. He immediately devoured these 5 10 million level one-star boundary stones, in addition to those 100 million boundary stones, into his internal kiliocosm domain. No matter how many boundary stones there were, they had to be converted into strength to be of use. The gains this time far exceeded Lin Feng's expectations. In fact, he didn't feel that paying such a heavy price wasn't worth it anymore. On the contrary, even if he had to pay a greater price, it was worth it. Hence, Lin Feng decisively entered seclusion in the treasure vault. He wanted to race against time to recover his strength, and even improve further to deal with the various troubles he might encounter next. Lin Feng vaguely sensed that as the epical cataclysm approached, the entire small kiliocosm would no longer be calm. The entire world was pitch black, filled with madness, blood, and killing. This was the celestial devil world, a world that belonged solely to the celestial devils. It was the lair of all the celestial devils in this small kiliocosm. At this moment 1, 2, 3, there were about 100 celestial devils gathered. If one looked carefully, they would see that every one of these hundreds of celestial devils was a true hegemon of a region. They were not ordinary celestial devil emperors, but 2-star celestial devil emperors. In fact, they were the best among 2-star celestial devil emperors. They had hundreds or thousands of kiliocosm domains and innumerable celestial devils under their command. But now, the 100 2-star celestial devil divine emperors were all standing respectfully in the void. In this void, there was a coffin. It was black and shiny, like black gold. It was as if any light would be devoured, vaguely forming a vortex that devoured everything. No one dared to approach this vortex. Even these hundreds of 2-star celestial devil emperors did not dare to approach. The ancestor is about to wake up, right? One of the celestial devils in a black robe said in a low voice. It should be soon. Didn't we all receive the instructions? Moreover, the epical cataclysm is imminent. This is the last epical cataclysm, and also the only chance for the ancestor to devour this small kiliocosm. If we lose this opportunity, we will all be annihilated, completely annihilated by the epical cataclysm. These celestial devil emperors' hearts sank, and their expressions were all a little grim. They were high and mighty, and commanded countless celestial devils under them. They even occupied half a small kiliocosm and were very free. However, they also had things that they were powerless against and afraid of, and that was the epical cataclysm. This epical cataclysm was not only a calamity for the controllers, but also a calamity for the celestial devils. In fact, it was a calamity for all life forms. As long as they were in the small kiliocosm, no one could escape it. While controllers had a way to transcend, so did celestial devils. That was the celestial devil in the coffin in front of them, the ancestor of all the celestial devils in this small kiliocosm. If Ancestor can succeed and completely devour the entire small kiliocosm to become an ancestral devil, he can break the world barrier and protect celestial devils like us. If not, the Ancestor will also be reduced to ashes like us. That's right. We are all celestial devils born in the 9th epoch, and are not comparable to Ancestor, who was born in the 1st epoch and experienced 8 epical cataclysms. This is also Ancestor's only chance. It's a pity that those controllers tried everything they could to stop us, trapping us in this half of the small kiliocosm. Soon, the last time Ancestor was injured, which was why he slumbered for so long. Once Ancestor awakens, and the epical cataclysm arrives, those controllers won't have the time to care about us. Only then will celestial devils like us have a chance. This is a great calamity. A calamity for everyone. The celestial devil emperors all had solemn expressions. No one was happy. Only 1 billion years were left before the epical cataclysm arrived. All of them had lived for 1 billion or 10 billion years. Merely 1 billion years was nothing. Thud, thud, thud. Suddenly, they heard a sound like heartbeats. All the celestial devils instantly fell silent. They even clutched their chests with pain written all over their faces. They were all dignified celestial devil emperors, and 2-star celestial devil emperors at that. There was no knowing how powerful their hearts were. Even if their hearts were destroyed and reduced to ashes, they would not be affected. It was already very difficult for ordinary power to injure them. But now, with the appearance of these mysterious heartbeats, these 2-star celestial devil emperors all revealed expressions of pain. They hurriedly clutched their chests, and a trace of fear appeared on their faces, as if they were afraid of something. Quick! Throw the offerings into the vortex and offer them to the ancestor. The ancestor is about to wake up. The hearts of the 2-star celestial devil emperors palpitated. Although they all hoped that the ancestor could wake up, they were also very afraid of the ancestor. If they could not satisfy the ancestor, they would be in trouble. Celestial devils were different from controllers. Celestial devils did not have that many factions. Even if they did, there was actually no order. They almost always revered strength. Once a celestial devil was clearly above other celestial devils, it would be very easy to bring together all the celestial devils. The ancestor was such an entity that was above all the celestial devils. Even if he fell into a deep slumber due to his injuries, no celestial devil would dare to be impudent. But now, as the ancestor gradually woke up, these celestial devil emperors became even more respectful. Buzz! The pitch-black vortex grew larger and larger. The speed at which it spun became faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, it had already doubled in size. The vortex emitted a terrifying aura. All the celestial devils felt a sense of suppression from the depths of their souls. Sacrifices! The celestial devil emperors shouted. Then the offerings were thrown out. Accompanied by screams, the offerings were all thrown into the vortex. Those offerings were celestial devils. Moreover, they were not ordinary celestial devils. They were all at least 1-star celestial devil emperors. The ancestor mentioned by the celestial devils actually fed on other celestial devils and required a large amount of offerings. No, those celestial devils who were used as sacrifices were actually not innocent. Most of them had made major mistakes and were implicated by the 2-star celestial devil emperors. From there, they were captured, and their strength was sealed. In any case, the awakening of the ancestor required a large number of sacrifices. These celestial devils that had violated the interests of the 2-star celestial devil emperor were naturally the best offerings. As one 1-star celestial devil emperor after another was thrown into the vortex grew larger and larger, almost 10 times larger than before. The fluctuations emitted from it also became stronger and stronger. All the celestial devil emperors prostrated themselves on the ground. Their entire bodies were trembling. They felt a sense of oppression from the depths of their souls, rendering them powerless to resist. This was the case for all, be it the ordinary celestial devils, 1-star celestial devil emperors, or 2-star celestial devil emperors. It was as if there was no difference between any celestial devils when facing this strange aura. Thud, thud, thud. As more and more offerings were made, the heartbeats in the pitch-black coffin became more and more intense. All the celestial devils seemed to be in great agony, but no matter what, they could not stop their bodies from trembling. Crack! Suddenly, a crack appeared on the black coffin. Although it was only a trace, this was the beginning of the coffin breaking. 1 strand, 2 strands, 3 strands, cracks appeared one after another, and quickly covered the entire coffin. They sprawled all over densely like spiderwebs. Finally, the coffin seemed to be overwhelmed. Thud! The black coffin suddenly exploded, and the black vortex disappeared at once. A black figure gradually appeared in the void. His face was unclear, and his entire body was like a black hole, devouring all light and energy. It was like a bottomless pit, born to devour everything. Is it finally coming? This is the last time. The epical cataclysm is finally coming. A sinister and hoarse voice, accompanied by a long sigh, came from the pitch-black figure, ringing through the void. There was clearly no echo, but all the celestial devils felt as if it was echoed in the void for a long time. "Greetings, ancestor." All the celestial demons prostrated themselves on the ground, be it the one-star celestial devil emperors or the great and powerful two-star celestial devil emperors. It was as if, at this moment, the only supreme entity among the celestial devils was that pitch-black figure. The ancestral celestial devil had awakened. The Skyhorn Alliance had already become a branch of the First Light. Supremacy Roundheart led the members of First Light to take over the entire Skyhorn Alliance in succession. They encountered some resistance, but Supremacy Roundheart quickly settled it. Lin Feng was very assured that Supremacy Roundheart was handling matters. He knew that Supremacy Roundheart was definitely also collecting the boundary stones as fast as possible. At this moment, in the secret chamber, Lin Feng had already completed his cultivation. I didn't expect 5 one-star boundary stones to grow into kiliocosm domains close to 200 million worlds in scale. There are also 100 million boundary stones. Together, they can grow into a total of 300 million worlds. Lin Feng slowly opened his eyes, and a sharp glint flashed across them. The aura on his body was gradually released. It had become even stronger. Originally, he had 450 million worlds. After losing 150 million worlds, there were only 300 million worlds left. Now, Lin Feng had gained a lot in the Skyhorn Alliance. This time, his worlds had increased by 300 million. It could be said to be the period when Lin Feng was growing the fastest. Hence, at this moment, there were already a total of 600 million worlds in his internal kiliocosm domain. He no longer seemed so far from reaching the billion level. The world origin has been exhausted. Even with boundary stones, I can't increase my internal worlds quickly anymore. I have to think of a way to find more world origin. Lin Feng sensed his body. The world origin was already depleted. Lin Feng had basically exhausted all the world origin he had accumulated in the past, as well as the 20 million portions of world origin he had obtained this time. If Lin Feng wanted to quickly increase the number of worlds in his internal kiliocosm domain and improve his strength, boundary stones were very important, but world origin was equally important. Both were indispensable. He had to find boundary stones as well as world origin. However, world origin was not as easy to find as boundary stones. Still, Lin Feng could find a shortcut. Under normal circumstances, world origin was indeed very difficult to find. But Lin Feng had another method, and that was to devour celestial devils. As long as he devoured a large number of celestial devils, world origin would not be a problem. By the way, why have all the celestial devils disappeared? Lin Feng recalled carefully, and realized that it seemed very easy to see celestial devils in the past. But why had all the celestial devils disappeared now? Had Lin Feng's kills been too vicious when expanding the First Light or the Domain Alliance back then? This caused all the celestial devils to disappear without a trace, or rather, leave this area. Lin Feng really did not know much about celestial devils. He only felt that celestial devils seemed to be everywhere. In the past, it was very easy to find them, but at his current level, it was not so easy to find them anymore. At this thought, Lin Feng exited seclusion and summoned Supremacy Roundheart. Right now, Supremacy Roundheart was very busy. The speed at which the First Light was expanding was simply too fast. Just taking over the forces of the Skyhorn Alliance was not that easy. Moreover, it would be even more troublesome to collect the boundary stones within the sphere of influence of the Skyhorn Alliance as fast as possible. It would take some time. Supremacy Roundheart. How is the First Light doing now? Lin Feng asked Supremacy Roundheart. Elder Lin, the expansion of the First Light is going very smoothly. It's just that there's still a period of time before we can completely take over the Skyhorn Alliance. However, I've investigated in detail before. The Skyhorn Alliance is a huge faction with hundreds of kiliocosm domains. Moreover, the upper echelons of the Skyhorn Alliance don't seem to pay much attention to boundary stones. Only high-quality boundary stones would attract the attention of the upper echelons of the Skyhorn Alliance. Therefore, if the First Light can completely plunder all the kiliocosm domains of the Skyhorn Alliance, we can obtain at least tens of millions of boundary stones. As for the exact number, it will depend on the reserves of each kiliocosm domain of the Skyhorn Alliance. Tens of millions of boundary stones? Not bad, not bad. It's already very good. Lin Feng nodded. He was very satisfied. His number of worlds had already increased by 300 million to begin with. Even if he could not get a single boundary stone, to Lin Feng, this trip was already worth it. Could be considered a huge gain. If he acquired another tens of millions of boundary stones, which might even help Lin Feng increase his number of worlds by another 100 million, that couldn't be better. However, Lin Feng did not just need boundary stones now. He also needed world origin. Supremacy round heart. The first light has been expanding rapidly, but the celestial devils have disappeared without a trace. Do you know the reason? The celestial devils? Supremacy round heart pondered for a moment before saying slowly, "Actually, I've only vaguely heard some rumors. It is only because the first light has a deep foundation that we can hear these rumors. It's rumored that our small kiliocosm is infinite, but in reality, it's divided into two parts. The celestial devils and the controllers dominate this small kiliocosm respectively. Between them, the celestial devils occupy half of the small kiliocosm, and the controllers also occupy half of the small kiliocosm. From time to time, some wars will break out between the two parties, and each would encounter victories and defeats. Our first light, the Opulent Lodge, and the Skyhorn Alliance are actually all in the half of the small kiliocosm occupied by the controllers. It's just that some celestial devils have ventured deep into the sphere of influence of our half of the small kiliocosm, preparing to devour our factions. However, they're all minor problems and are harmless. The strongest among those celestial devils are only ordinary two-star emperors. They're nothing much. Some of our controller factions have also ventured deep into the half of the small kiliocosm controlled by the celestial devils. Both parties are just evenly matched. Lin Feng came to a realization. No wonder he seemed to see very few celestial devils. Ever since the indefinite sect retreated in defeat, there were only a few celestial devils left. This seemed to be very different from the legends, which said that the number of celestial devils was infinite and spread throughout the small kiliocosm. From the looks of it, this was the controller's sphere of influence and the base of the controllers. It was already difficult for celestial devils to infiltrate this place and occupy some strongholds, let alone completely overrun it. That was even more impossible. As their foothold, the indefinite sect, was uprooted, the celestial devils in the entire region naturally disappeared. Supremacy round heart. Can you find traces of the celestial devils? If there's really no other way, investigate the half of the small kiliocosm where the celestial devils are. What's the exact situation? Lin Feng did not expect the celestial devils and the controllers to be in such a situation. The two parties were evenly matched, and each occupied half a small kiliocosm. This exceeded Lin Feng's imagination. Originally, in Lin Feng's mind, although there were many celestial devils and they were very dangerous, they did not seem to be strong. At the very least, after he became a one-star or even two-star supremacy, he could basically defeat all celestial devils he came across. He swept through celestial devil worlds one after another, almost clearing out all the nearby celestial devils. However, now that he heard Supremacy Round Heart's explanation, Lin Feng came to a realization. It turned out that the celestial devils he had swept up were only a small fraction of the celestial devils. It would not be an exaggeration to call the celestial devils that had ventured deep into the controller's half of the small kiliocosm cannon fodder. They were nothing much. True celestial devils were terrifying entities that were evenly matched with controllers and occupied half a small kiliocosm. Search for traces of the celestial devils? Elder Lin, actually, I also have something to report to you. Perhaps Elder Lin's doubts will all be answered. Oh? What is it? Lin Feng was a little curious. He did not know what made even Supremacy Round Heart unable to make a decision, and had to report to him. After all, everyone knew now that Lin Feng, the Dark Domain Supremacy, was the actual person in charge of First Light. Elder Lin, a controller who claims to be Supremacy 9 Cataclysms, has come to visit Elder Lin. Supremacy Round Heart said slowly. Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. He knew that Supremacy Roundheart would not let just anyone visit him. At this moment, Supremacy Roundheart mentioned the Supremacy 9 Cataclysms so seriously. This Supremacy 9 Cataclysms was probably not simple. Supremacy Roundheart's expression was solemn as he said in a low voice, "He's strong, very strong. I even seem to sense an aura even more terrifying than Elder Lin's on Supremacy 9 Cataclysms. He's a 2-star supremacy at the very least." No wonder Supremacy Roundheart was so solemn, and even specially came to report to Lin Feng. An aura stronger than Lin Feng's? Was this possible? Lin Feng tensed slightly. He narrowed his eyes slightly and muttered in a low voice, "An aura stronger than mine? Interesting. Did this Supremacy 9 Cataclysms say why he's here?" No. Supremacy 9 Cataclysms only said that Elder Lin must go personally to know his identity. Lin Feng pondered for a moment. He had just dealt with the Skyhorn Alliance, and his strength had improved greatly, so he was not afraid of anyone. However, the sudden appearance of a powerful 2-star supremacy was still somewhat intriguing. Lin Feng felt that there must be something unusual about this. "All right, I'll go and meet this Supremacy 9 Cataclysms." Lin Feng stood up and followed Supremacy Roundheart to the original hall of the Skyhorn Alliance. As soon as he entered, Lin Feng sensed an unusual aura. In the hall sat a middle-aged man. He was dressed in a white robe, and his entire being was immaculate. The aura on his body appeared and disappeared intermittently, making it impossible to see through him, only giving one the feeling that he was profound and unfathomable. However, Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat, because he sensed a strong aura of danger from the man in front of him. It seemed to be far more threatening than the 4 supremacies, including Supremacy Vicissitude back then. This person was not simple. As Lin Feng entered the hall and sat at the head of the table, the eyes of the Supremacy 9 Cataclysms finally lit up slightly. However, he only nodded slightly in acknowledgement and did not do anything. Lin Feng said directly, "I heard that Supremacy 9 Cataclysms wants to see me, but I don't seem to know Supremacy 9 Cataclysms." Supremacy 9 Cataclysms smiled and said, "It's true that the Dark Domain Supremacy doesn't know me, but I do know the Dark Domain Supremacy. Yes, let me introduce myself first. I'm Supremacy 9 Cataclysms, currently a member of the Epic Alliance. I'm also here this time as the guide for this region. I'm here to specially invite the Dark Domain Supremacy to join the Epic Alliance." The Epic Alliance? Lin Feng was shocked. He had never heard of this alliance, but for it to be crowned with the word epic, it must be extraordinary. At the very least, this alliance must know about the epical cataclysm. Then, what is the purpose for the establishment of this epic alliance? Lin Feng pondered for a moment and asked. Boom! Lin Feng was stunned. The epical cataclysm. It was the epical cataclysm again. Supremacy Roundheart was even more shocked. This was the first time he had heard of the Epic Alliance and the Epical Cataclysm. Even though Lin Feng knew all kinds of information about the Epical Cataclysm, he did not tell Supremacy Roundheart. This was because it was meaningless. Supremacy Roundheart was only a 1-star supremacy. What was the point of telling him? Supremacy Roundheart could not do anything at all. In every epical cataclysm, only impossibly lucky 1-star supremacies might be able to survive safely. However, this time, no matter how impossibly lucky a 1-star supremacy was, it was impossible for them to survive. This was because this was the last epical cataclysm. All those who could not survive it would be reduced to ashes. Seeing Supremacy Roundheart's shocked expression, Supremacy 9 Cataclysms only glanced at him calmly and did not find it surprising. Since Lin Feng allowed Supremacy Roundheart to stay, it was enough to show Lin Feng's trust in him. Dark Domain Supremacy, I believe you know about the Epical Cataclysm, right? The 9th Epical Cataclysm is imminent, and this is also the last Epical Cataclysm. If we can't survive it, everything will be over. We established the Epic Alliance to unite the native forces of our small Kiliacosm to survive the Epical Cataclysm together. We only invite local controllers, and they must be at least 2-star supremacies to be invited. Dark Domain Supremacy, you already have the qualifications for invitation. Hence, I specially came to invite you. Supremacy 9 Cataclysms spoke confidently and without any reservations. He answered directly, giving Lin Feng a huge shock. Qualification to be invited? Supremacy 9 Cataclysms. How many members are there in the Epic Alliance? Apologies, this is an internal secret. Only official members of the Epic Alliance are qualified to know this. Lin Feng changed the topic and continued to ask, Supremacy 9 Cataclysms, when you said that you only invite 2-star supremacies among the local supremacies, did you mean that you're only inviting me? It has nothing to do with the First Light. That's right. We're only inviting the Dark Domain supremacy. As for the faction the supremacy belongs to, it's not included. In reality, the Epic Alliance is just a loose alliance. It provides some information for communication among itself and builds contacts among the local supremacies. More importantly, we resist the celestial devils together. Lin Feng was silent for a long time, as if he was considering something. Supremacy 9 Cataclysms did not rush him. Instead, he waited quietly. After a long while, Lin Feng finally raised his head and asked, everything would be reduced to dust under the epical cataclysm. Why didn't you invite all the 2-star supremacies, including those who descended from the medium kiliocosms? What's the goal of the supremacies who descended from the medium kiliocosms? Actually, we all know very well that they're just a bunch of pitiful worms. They're all slaves of the kiliocosm sovereigns. What's the point of asking them to join? Their goal is only the small kiliocosm origin. We're different. This small kiliocosm is the foundation of our safety, our hope, and our home. We naturally have to do our best to protect the small kiliocosm. Be it celestial devils or those supremacies who descended from the medium kiliocosms, strictly speaking, they're all enemies of native controllers like us. Lin Feng relaxed slightly. Clearly, he already understood the nature of the Epic Alliance and its attitude towards those medium kiliocosm factions. This was a gathering place of local factions, and might even be the largest local faction. One last question. What benefits do I get from joining the Epic Alliance? Also, it might bring me some danger. Don't tell me that there's no danger at all. It's impossible for there to only be benefits. Lin Feng's gaze was intense as he stared at Supremacy 9 Cataclysms. As expected of the Dark Domain supremacy, you rose rapidly to power in a short period of time, and could even annihilate the Opulent Lodge and the Skyhorn Alliance. That's right. It's naturally impossible for there to be only benefits and no disadvantages in joining the Epic Alliance. It's normal for there to be both advantages and disadvantages, but it depends on what choices the Dark Domain supremacy makes. Lin Feng nodded. This was indeed very valuable. A way to get to know each other was not that simple, let alone great and powerful 2-star supremacies. All 2-star supremacies were hegemons of a region. With the momentum of the First Light, how could Lin Feng befriend other 2-star supremacies? It would probably be lucky as long as a great battle did not break out, let alone befriend them. However, with the Epic Alliance as a platform and channel, things were different. They could contact and communicate with each other to obtain all kinds of information. It was very convenient. The second benefit is that we can exchange for what we need. We can even exchange for some things in the Alliance. We can also issue quests. As long as you can afford the price, you can recruit powerful enough supremacies as helpers. Lin Feng's eyes lit up. This was another path. Sometimes, no matter how rich one was or how deep their foundation was, if they did not even know many 2-star supremacies, how could they ask for help? Lastly, after joining the Epic Alliance, when the epical cataclysm arrives, our Epic Alliance can become a huge faction that fights for opportunities in the epical cataclysm. As for success or failure, that's not something we can know. I'm afraid no one can know either. During the chaos of the epical cataclysm, the celestial devils, the supremacies of the medium kiliocosm, the many hidden experts from the previous epochs, and so on, I'm afraid no one can deal with all these various factions, schemes, and hidden experts alone. Even a 3-star supremacy is no exception. However, the Epic Alliance can allow us to unite. Currently, there isn't a single 3-star supremacy in the Epic Alliance. However, precisely because of this, absolute independence of the Epic Alliance can be guaranteed. It will not be subject to any restrictions. Lin Feng nodded. Any one of these 3 points would indeed bring great benefits. Then tell me about the drawbacks. Lin Feng knew very well that to obtain anything, one had to pay the price. Since joining the Epic Alliance had so many benefits, there must be downsides as well. He had to weigh the pros and cons before deciding whether to join the Epic Alliance. There are indeed drawbacks, and that is that we are not well liked by those medium Kiliakosm factions. This is one thing. Before the epical cataclysm, those medium Kiliakosm factions would not take the initiative to attack our Epic Alliance. After all, they are just the arrangements of the Kiliakosm sovereigns. No one would dare to disrupt the arrangements of the Kiliakosm sovereigns before the epical cataclysm. However, we still have another imminent threat, and that is the Celestial Devils. Compared to the factions in those medium Kiliakosms, the Celestial Devils are not so easy to deal with. The Celestial Devils are suppressed in 1/2 of the small Kiliakosm because our Epic Alliance is the main force. It's entirely thanks to the suppression of our Epic Alliance that those Celestial Devils can be repelled and stay obediently in 1/2 of the small Kiliakosm. However, we pay a heavy price for it. Even 2-star supremacies are in danger of falling. However, apart from a few major battles, the Celestial Devils are all very quiet. The 2-star supremacies do not have to attack for now. However, there's one thing. If the Celestial Devils advance in full force, all the members of the Epic Alliance have to resist the Celestial Devils. Those who disobey will be expelled from the Epic Alliance, and in serious cases, kill orders would be issued through quests by the Epic Alliance. Lin Feng tensed. This was indeed a drawback and even dangerous. However, it actually made him vaguely excited. This was because he had interpreted a very important message from it. It was that the Epic Alliance was the main force resisting the Celestial Devils. Moreover, the Epic Alliance's attitude towards the Celestial Devils was very unyielding. This was very different from the Opulent Lodge, the Skyhorn Alliance, and even some small factions that Lin Feng had seen. Actually, even the First Light only dealt with its own troubles and expanded towards the uncharted region. When it came to Celestial Devils, it would avoid them whenever it could. It would only fight them when it really could not avoid them. Some factions even worked with Celestial Devils. Deep down, Lin Feng abhorred this. Be it the Domain Alliance he had once established or the First Light that he joined later, as long as Lin Feng held the authority, he would deal with Celestial Devils forcefully. After asking the last question, Lin Feng did not continue asking. As long as he joined the Epic Alliance, he would naturally know many things clearly. Although he was a very ancient supremacy, even in the First Light, he had never come into contact with a secret alliance like the Epic Alliance. From the looks of it, the origins of this Epic Alliance were simply awe-inspiring. How shocking was it to be able to resist all the Celestial Devils alone, and even suppress the Celestial Devils in half a small Kiliakosm. It had to be known how vast the entire vast small Kiliakosm was. It was simply infinite. Even a 1-star supremacy would probably not be able to travel through the entire small Kiliakosm in tens of thousands of years, even if they warped and flew constantly. The Epic Alliance, on the other hand, encompassed every corner of the vast small Kiliakosm. It was obvious that it was very powerful. Those legendary 2-star supremacies were probably all members of the Epic Alliance. If he had not followed Lin Feng, Supremacy Roundheart might never have come into contact with such a secret in his entire life. In particular, the epical cataclysm, that Supremacy 9 cataclysms and Lin Feng had mentioned repeatedly made Supremacy Roundheart very curious. He even had a vague premonition. Judging from the name, it could not be a good thing. However, Supremacy Roundheart did not make inquiries at this moment. Now was the time for Lin Feng to make a decision. No matter how many questions he had to wait for Lin Feng to make his choice before asking. Moreover, he believed that Lin Feng would definitely tell him. Time passed slowly. Lin Feng seemed to consider it for a long time. After a long while, Lin Feng finally raised his head again, as if he had made up his mind. Supremacy 9 cataclysms. I don't seem to have any reason not to join the Epic Alliance, do I? Ha ha ha. Then congratulations, Dark Domain Supremacy. From now on, you and I can be considered colleagues in the Epic Alliance. As your guide, the matters of the Dark Domain Supremacy will have a lot to do with me in the future. Supremacy 9 Cataclysms appeared very happy, but not surprised. It was as if he had already expected Lin Feng to make such a decision. By the way, may I be so bold as to ask if Supremacy 9 Cataclysms is a billion-level supremacy? Lin Feng's expression tensed as he suddenly asked in a solemn tone.